This is Zestology. It's the podcast all about energy, vitality and motivation. I'm Tony Wrighton, and I've got a question for you. How many times have you checked your mobile phone in the last hour? Oh, I'm guessing you might not know. If the answer is 0, I'm impressed. Okay, another question. How many times have you checked your email in the last hour? Again, if the answer is 0, I'm impressed. And the reason I'm impressed is because I find it really hard, this digital distraction. So I have found one of the world's top experts on digital distraction. Professor Gloria Mark specialises in this subject and information overload, and also how we can adapt our behaviour to be more efficient on a day-to-day basis, but more fulfilled as well. And just check your phone a little bit less. She's actually looked specifically at the role between internet access and multitasking. And I am not good at multitasking, so I'm interested to ask her about this. She's also studied the link between stress, mood, and computer usage. This is fairly astonishing, and she goes into it in the podcast. And, at the start of 2020, I wanted to do a podcast specifically on tech distraction and managing tech as well as possible. I did one about a month ago with August Bryce, and doing another one today with Gloria Mark. I know it's not just me suffering from it, but what ends up happening with Zestology is the things that I think that are important to me, I end up doing from a selfish perspective, but I also kind of know that it will resonate with other people as well. And with tech, I'm just one of those I've got a very alive mind, but that can often mean that I'll get distracted by the latest shiny page on Facebook or email that kind of pings and takes my distraction away from my focus, away from whatever I was doing. And it just means that I'm ending up doing lots of things at once, nothing particularly well. As I said, I'm not good at multitasking. So here is someone who might be able to help me with that, Professor Gloria Mark. Digital distraction is a big area for you. What's driven you to look into this area? What's motivated you to kind of delve deep into this area?
Well, it actually comes from personal experience. So I used to live in Europe. I lived in Germany, and I worked at a very large research institution. And I was able to just work on one or a few projects. And I was able to be able to concentrate very, very deeply on those because these were my sole tasks. I moved back to the U.S. and became an academic. And then I also took on teaching duties and had to write grants and sit on committees and do extra service activities in addition to doing research and mentoring students. And before I knew it, I was just switching between tasks more than I ever dreamed. And I looked around me and I saw other people doing the same. And I thought of it as an empirical question. To what extent are people multitasking? Is it just me, or is it more widespread? And that's what started me to investigate this more methodically.
It's something that I actually wonder a lot, and I also am motivated by personal experience in getting in touch with you, because I noticed that my brain is just not built for doing more than one thing at once, and not only I'm not very good at it, at doing anything right when I'm kind of focused on lots of things at once. I notice a sense of agitation when I'm trying to do too many things at once, or just after a full day of constantly shuffling screens between email and WhatsApp and trying to do some work and maybe a word screen as well. And actually, where my day job is, I work for a TV station over here called Sky Sports. I'm surrounded by 400 screens in the studio when I'm working there, and my brain is utterly frazzled when I come home. Have you noticed that increasingly our brains are changing a little bit because of the amount of screens we're surrounded by?
Well, they They have to be changing. I don't examine this at the level of brain activity, but I will say that most people are by nature monochronic, which means they like to finish one task through to completion before working on something else. But it's our environment, it's living in the digital age that's making us behave polychronic, which means switching our attention rapidly between different screens, different devices, different individuals. It's all wrapped up into one big package because with the development of new apps comes new connections, comes new sources of information, and so we're just switching rapidly. And yes, this is associated with stress, and our work has shown that the more that people switch their attention throughout the day to again different information sources, different people, different screens, the higher is their stress. And we measure stress objectively using heart rate monitors or wearable devices.
Wow. So, let me ask you a bit more about that research. How did you discover that people feel more stressed when they're switching their attention?
Well, we measure it objectively, so it's physiological stress. So we use a measure that's called heart rate variability.
Yes.
And this is the distance between two consecutive normal heartbeats. And the less variable that measure is, the more stressed people are. You can think of it as people being in a fight or flight kind of syndrome where, from an evolutionary perspective, the bear is chasing you and you're just prepared and ready to run. It's the same kind of feeling that people experience.
Yeah. And so how did you? So they were wearing kind of chest straps that measure heart rate variability. I actually wear one of these Oura rings that measures my heart rate variability overnight, and
Yes.
it definitely goes up when I'm on holiday. So that's probably kind of ties in with some of your research. But then, how did you measure the amount of stress that people were under, or the
Yes.
amount of multitasking that they were doing?
Okay, so yes, we measure stress using heart rate monitors. We also use wearable wrist devices as well. Uh, but we measured stress by looking at screen changes as people are working on the computer. So we go into real workplaces, and people are just in their natural habitat. They're doing the work that they ordinarily do, and we measure the screen that's in the forefront on their computer screen. So if you click on, say, a Word document, that comes into the forefront, and we measure the precise amount of time that every window on the computer is in the forefront. It's a reasonable proxy for where attention is, because we find that if people are switching their attention, let's say you're going to email, you will click on your email and that email window comes into the forefront. So it's a reasonable proxy of where people are shifting their attention throughout the day. And so that we find a very strong correlation between shifting screens or shifting windows and people's stress.
That's extraordinary. It's actually very important information, that, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
Do you think that people are as concerned? Because that is astonishing, because we're all trying to do more and we're all multitasking more and more. And everyone listening to this will resonate with what you've just said in terms of how we used to work 10, 15 years ago and how we do now. But do you think that we're actually concerned enough about all this?
I think that's a really great question. I think people are concerned, but I don't think people are doing that much about it. It's a bit of a paradox here, I don't think the burden should be on people by themselves to be more disciplined, to be able to stop switching and focus more. Because here's something to think about. There are two kinds of distractions. There are those that come from some kind of external source, like an email notification or the phone ringing.
Yes.
But there's also distractions that come from oneself, an internal source. So something inside of people that lead them to switch to check information or contact someone. It could be some memory that comes up. And so if people were super disciplined, they might be able to control these internal sources, but it's very hard to control the external distractions that come. And I don't think the whole burden should be on people. I think there should be a part played by technology. I think when people work in organizations, I think organizations can change policy to reduce distractions. And even there can be regulations and laws that, for example, prevent people from being penalized for answering email after hours.
Well, I wonder if, I often think, 50 years ago, adverts for smoking were everywhere and we all thought it was absolutely fine. And now we look back and we're absolutely horrified by how kind of commonplace smoking and the brands surrounding cigarettes were. I wonder what our generation will kind of, when people look back, they'll say, I can't believe they allowed people to send emails at midnight. And, things like 11-year-olds easily able to open accounts on Instagram. And I wonder about, we've got a small baby who's at the moment not really that interested in screens, but I've got a feeling quite soon he will be interested in Peppa Pig or whatever it is that we want to show him. And it's quite tempting for parents to put the baby in front of a screen, isn't it? So I wonder what people will think in the future. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do think that children should not be exposed to screen time too early. So they need time to develop, to develop psychologically, but also to develop good habits. When my two daughters were growing up, we did not have television, right? We had computers, but we limited their screen time, and we certainly didn't have television, but we encouraged them to read books. And I see now that they, having developed the habit of reading books and appreciating life offline, if you will,
yeah,
it helped them become better able to cope with the digital world. So I do think parents should restrict screen time to young kids. Wait till they get older. Wait till they get exposed to a lot of other things than just spending time on the screen. For example, enjoying nature.
Yes.
There's a lot of great studies that show that just spending 20 minutes outside in nature can significantly reduce stress.
And then what about adults? I think that, you mentioned how the onus shouldn't be on us to kind of have the willpower and the discipline to switch off. And actually, it's just, again, speaking from my own experience, and I know other people who listen to this podcast, it's just so hard, isn't it, to have the willpower to move away from the infinite scroll on Facebook, for example. And that is precisely because they've got very talented programmers working on reasons and ways to keep you there. And actually, I heard you on Tristan Harris's podcast originally, and what you were saying resonated so much. And one of the topics that they've talked about on there is how these top programmers use a lot of the similar techniques that are used in casinos to keep people gambling, to keep them on their technology.
Yes, absolutely. And, there are algorithms that are developed that can really personalize information toward people. I think and it sounds very ironical, but I do think that technology can play a role in helping us become less distracted because technology can do things like detect when people are stressed. And there are a lot of sophisticated techniques that can do that. For example, even through webcams. There are ways to detect when people's stress is increased. And when that happens, I think the computer can play a role in getting people to stop screen switching or suggest interventions like, okay, Gloria, it's time to take a break, right? You've been switching rapidly this last 30-minute stretch, so now stop things, go take a break, or go take a 10-minute walk and, expose yourself to nature, and then you'll come back and be refreshed.
Yeah, but I know what I'm like, unless the screen literally shuts off and does not allow me to access the keyboard, I'll just ignore it and carry on.
Yes, absolutely. That's a challenge. Habits are extremely hard to break, especially these very strong habits that are ingrained in us from working with digital media day in and day out. But people are also rewarded, right? So if why do people on average check email about 77 times a day? These are information workers that we've studied. It's because every so often you're going to get a reward from an email. You're going to get an email from an old friend or an invitation for a speaking engagement or something really rewarding. And that's enough to keep driving you back and checking email. And same with Facebook and same with other social media.
And I heard you talking about how our average attention spans have come down quite considerably over the last, I can't remember over the time span, but presumably that's based around the same reasons, the rewards that come from flicking to Facebook or email or whatever it might be.
I think that's certainly part of it, but I also think, why do people switch screens so rapidly? A lot of it is just habits that have been developed, and people are just conditioned, in my view, to have short attention spans. And we actually have looked at the relationship between external distractions, interruptions, in other words, any kind of interruption from an identifiable source, and the relationship between that and these internal or self-interruptions. When external interruptions go down, what happens is people begin to self-interrupt more. It's like people are just determined to have short attention spans. And if you're not getting interrupted by something outside of yourself, then you begin to self-interrupt to maintain that pace of very short attention.
I think that's actually why some of your work has resonated so much. I mean, one of the things that I've thought about a lot is my attention span over the years. And I recently looked over some old school reports, and one of them from the age of, I must have been 9 or 10, it said, I can't remember what the subject was, but the teacher just wrote these words on a slip of paper. He said, Tony is quite literally, bone idle. Which I don't think is like particularly positive feedback. But when I think back, and actually that was quite a theme across my reports, and I wasn't very high achieving at school, I think I'm actually not bone idle at all. I really like applying myself to topics. I'm sure it was all to do with attention. And now that was pre-technology, that was pre the information age when I was at school. So it must have been the internal distractions. For whatever reason, I'm just hardwired to distract myself a lot to the extent my teacher thinks I'm bone idle.
Well, it sounds like you had and still have a very active imagination.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I do. But I suppose I wonder if, firstly, clearly some people are more predisposed to having a distracted mind. But secondly, one of the reasons I've been looking forward to you is that I know you are leading the search for solutions that kind of can alleviate this distraction and the stress that leads from it. And so basically, I'm hoping you can tell me what to do to improve my attention span.
Well, there are actually several things I think people can do. So, attention is generally very goal oriented, and we switch our attention to meet different goals. And so, one way to help things is to simply write down what your goals are. What is it that you want to accomplish? If it's too hard to envision goals for a full day, then start small. Think about, what do I want to accomplish this morning? Or even, what do I want to accomplish in the next hour? And articulate those goals, write them down, and have them in your field of view. I use Postit notes on my computer. And so I'm always, every time I go to my keyboard, I see these goals written down, and it helps me stay on track, right? Because it's a constant reminder of what it is I need to accomplish. So it helps me stay the course. So I do think that that's important. Yeah. Now, some people ask, why not just turn off distractions? We actually did an empirical study where we tested software where people actually turn off distractions, and we had people define, what are the distractions for you? So for most people, it's social media. For others, it's news. Other people have all kinds of random sites that are distracting for them. But here's what we found, that cutting off distractions works fine for about half the people. And for the other half, it actually harms them. And right. For the half that it works great for, these are people who have difficulty with self-control. So they're the people that when they go to Facebook, they just can't pull away. And before they know it, 45 minutes is gone and they've been on Facebook. But for the other half of the people, they have a reasonable amount of self-control, and they're able to use so-called distractions, things like news and social media. They can use those to take refresher breaks, and then they can come right back on track. When you take away those people's ability to go to those sites, what happens is they tend to work straight through and get even more stressed. So it's important to understand individual differences in distractions. And that's why, again, I go back to the idea of technology, that technology, and it's very ironical, but it can be used to help people focus more, because it can develop personalized solutions for each individual depending on how susceptible they are to distractions.
And so obviously one of your personalized solutions is Post-it notes. What else in your own line of research, which actually I think is very interesting, the link between, I read a book called Opening Up, which was the link between writing things down and making deep cognitive changes. And I think they talked about the link between the kinesthetic act of picking up a pen and writing it down, and then the auditory link between your brain talking to you, telling you what you're going to write, and then seeing it written down as well. Just interrupting this podcast for one moment to remind you that it is brought to you by Sunlighten Saunas. And studies have shown, scientific studies have shown, that not only do infrared saunas help with natural pain relief during treatment, but even after months of ending a sauna treatment, the pain is still significantly lower. Did you need more reasons to try a sauna, and specifically a Sunlighten sauna? I mean, if you need one more reason, I do have Netflix in there too. But perhaps that's a slightly shallow reason compared to the fact that your pain relief could be gone, or your pain could be relieved months after ending a sauna treatment. Check out Sunlight and Saunas, mention Zestology for £200, $200 off, and now back to the podcast. I wonder what else. It's about 8:30 in the morning your time in lovely Irvine. Irvine, yep, and it's about 3:30 here. But I mean, how does your routine change, or how has it changed based on your own research?
So, I'm someone who's not very good at eating my own dog food, as they say, in that I also get very distracted. But I try to be very aware of when I'm distracted, when I have deadlines, when if I have work to do, and if I take a break and I go to, say, social media, or these days it's the news, that's very distracting. I do try to always keep it in my mind that this should only be a short break. This should not be something that's going to pull me away for too long. And so I always try to keep it in my mind. And it's a kind of habit that I develop. So in other words, if I'm going to go to a news site, I'll go to that news site, but I always try to keep in my mind that this needs to be short. I need to get back on track. That does require discipline. And I don't think that this is a good solution for everybody, because for some people it can just be even more of a burden to always keep this notion in mind that you've got to get back on track. But this is something that for me, I find that it works.
Yeah. And then any habits based around, not checking technology in the morning when you wake up, or switching off at night, or anything like that, or is it kind of just a bit more relaxed in your personal life?
Well, so in my routine, I do check email in the morning because I have to. There's just a lot of things that come up that I need to take care of at the beginning of the day. I do try to batch email to the extent that I can, which means I try to check it infrequently. So I try to, certainly midday I check it. And I usually check it more often than that, but I try not to check it continually, because I know that there are just not going to be emails that come up continually between, say, early in the morning and say mid-morning. So I try to restrain myself in that sense. Here's where I do think organizations can play a role. So, if people are in the workplace can, in fact, batch emails. So it only sends it out, say, first thing in the morning, maybe sends it out before lunch, and then maybe after lunch, and then maybe toward the end of the day. And then I think that's a way to slowly retrain people and break habits.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be really interesting to look at a company that's done that and see how their productivity would potentially increase. It'd be quite a bold company that would take that step in the first place, wouldn't it, I suppose? But
yeah, again, as I said, it's about changing habits, and it's really, really hard to change habits. Anyone who's tried to stop smoking knows this. And this is a form of habit breaking. And I do think that people need support to be able to break these habits of just continually checking social media, et cetera.
And actually, as you say, in 30, 50 years' time, it might be that organisations regularly intervene in the way that their employees communicate with each other on email. I read a fascinating article about a surf company based in this country who they just worked out that people were spending so much downtime on their own phones when they could be working and kind of faffing about, that they said, right, we're going to make the working day 5 hours long. and at 2 o'clock you could all go home or go surfing or whatever you want to do. So it's from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. every day, and they found that productivity and sales and profitability and everything else increased because people were just super focused for those 5 hours. And not only that, they also found that everybody wanted to come and work for them because it was a 5-hour working day. So it's a great idea for that company to do it.
Yes, I remember reading about that. That's such a great idea.
Yeah, I forwarded it on to a friend of mine who runs a company, and he said, it's just a bit too much of a gamble to take at the moment. I read that you did a bit of research in how people use social media in times of crisis. What was that about?
Yeah, so the idea behind that was, when people are in a disruptive environment, and we were actually looking at people in war environments, it's really unsafe to travel. And we looked at, one of the places we looked at were people in Iraq during the Iraq War, from 2003 till I think it was around 2010 or so. And people couldn't travel. And of course, if you can't travel, it affects so many things about people. It affects their identity. You can't go to work. So, for example, we interviewed people from all kinds of work roles. I remember medical students were telling us that, who am I anymore? What's my identity? I'm not going to medical school, so who am I? So we were interested to understand how people could use social media to help repair and rebuild their social relationships, their identities, but also just to help them navigate in this very, very dangerous environment. And we found that people developed ingenious ways to do this. For example, in Iraq, it was very, very dangerous for people to get into even a taxi because they could be kidnapped. And so people developed networks to only drive with people who were trusted. And so people they built these social networks and relied very heavily on them just to navigate around the world, to know where, with who they could travel, what stores they could go to, what neighborhoods just imagine people spread all over this city continually sending out messages to everyone in their network about, here's a roadblock, here's a bomb. And people relied on these to go about their daily lives.
Wow. Yeah. So that's really interesting, isn't it? Because that is looking at the digital world, but in a very different way to looking at how kind of our digital behavior is changing over time and how it kind of is impacted by distraction.
Yes.
Well, I feel very motivated to finish this interview and go and switch off and shut the laptop. So thank you for that. What is something I've asked everyone on Zestology? What is one book that you would recommend and one tip for living with more energy and vitality?
Okay, well, it's a book that I just finished, and it's a book called Educated by Tara Westover. And I was very struck by the insights that she developed. She had a very hard life, and but she came out, I would say, victorious from this life, and ended up going to Cambridge and getting a PhD. But it's just a very I would say very insightful and very revealing book about the author, and I just found it very, very interesting. It's a very honest book about her struggles, and I do recommend it.
That sounds excellent.
Yeah.
And what about the tip then for living with more energy and vitality?
Well, my tip is that I exercise regularly, and I jog, and I do this in the mornings. I have to do it in the mornings, or I run out of energy by the end of the day. And I do this religiously. And no matter what, if I have early morning meetings or whatever I have scheduled, I always make sure that I have time to run. And I will start out saying, "Oh my God, I can't get out there and run." But as soon as I start running, and especially when I'm done, I feel so great. So again, that's a habit. That's a habit that I've developed, and it really keeps me going.
And also in this day and age, it's possible with the amount of screens that we've got, and because a lot of our work is screen based in so many industries now, you're just so in your head that actually just getting out and doing exercise gets you into your body, doesn't it? Which is something that I find very helpful as well.
Yes.
I totally agree. If you leave it towards, if it gets to kind of 4:00 and you haven't been to the gym or you haven't been for your run, it's too late really. I'm knackered by then. Listen, that's so great. Thank you so much for coming on Zestology. Where can people find more about you and read more of your papers and research?
Well, they can go to my webpage, and it's gmark at, actually, if you just Google my name, Gloria Mark, and University of California, Irvine, you should get to my homepage. That's the easiest way. And I have a page with publications, and you'll be able to read all the stuff I've worked on there.
Oh, I highly recommend it. I mean, I did that. I Googled your name in preparation for this interview. And it is just jaw-dropping, some of this stuff. I mean, the amount of times we're distracted every minute and so on. It's just incredible. So thank you very much for coming on Zestology anyway. And I definitely feel inspired now to go and do something that doesn't involve a screen.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
There you go. Thanks once again to Professor Gloria Mark. And if you enjoyed that podcast, you might want to go back just a few podcasts to my interview with August Bryce, which was at the start of December. So only 3 or 4 podcasts to go. And we looked in that podcast on a similar theme at 3 tech toxins. Similar theme, but very different guest. And tech toxin 1 was addiction, and how a dependency on our screens is like a growing problem. We're just all on our screens all the time. And I realised I'm in a studio today, I'm indoors today. Normally I'm outside, I don't know, but I'm indoors today. And as I was walking to this studio, I was walking along looking at a message on my phone. And when you almost bump into someone and they give you that slightly irritated look because you were walking in their lane, well, that's what happened. Tech toxin 2 is radiation and blue light that we talked about on the podcast with August Bryce. There are now more cell phones than people on Earth. And tech toxin 3 is privacy stealers. So our personal information, where we go online, what we say or do, and who we give our information to. And I thought that was an excellent podcast with August Bryce. And I follow her on Instagram as well, Tech Wellness. And, shameless plug, if you want to follow me on Instagram, it's at Tony Wrighton. As always, thank you for listening to Zestology. Thank you to my partners, Sunlight and Saunas, who've brought you this podcast. It's the perfect time to get in the sauna at the moment, isn't it? It's just so cold out. But I hope you'll check them out. And plenty more January inspiration coming your way very shortly on Zestology. So I'll see you then.